Sometimes the heart you give so honestly becomes too much for someone who never learned how to receive, not because you were wrong for loving deeply, but because they were unprepared for something real when all they've ever known was survival, performance, or fleeting desire. Welcome to Broken Truth, where love meets lies, and every story reveals the pain behind the smile. Some people betray not because they don't feel anything, but because they feel too much and don't know what to do with it. Real love demands vulnerability, a mirror that exposes all the parts they've tried to hide when they meet someone who loves them gently, honestly, and without conditions. It shakes the foundation they've built on fear, control, or emotional detachment. They're drawn in, but once the intimacy grows too raw or unfamiliar, they self-sabotage, they run, they replace deep connection with shallow thrills. Not because those thrills are better, but because they're easier. Betrayal then becomes their escape from the terrifying weight of being truly seen. They told you that you were everything they ever wanted, and you, with your soft hands and open heart, believed them, not because you were naive, but because they looked you in the eye when they said it, because their voice didn't shake when they promised forever, because something in you, that hopeful part that had always chosen love, even when it hurt, wanted this time to be different. Wanted them to be different, and in the beginning, they pulled you in gently. They memorized your laugh like it was their favorite song. They watched you talk like they were learning a new language. They touched your hand like it was a vow, and you let them in, slowly but wholly, showing them the corners of yourself that no one else had stayed long enough to explore. You gave them the keys to your silences. You let them into the room where your childhood pain lived, the place where you still kept your fear of abandonment folded in old diary pages, the part of you that still ached at 3 a.m., even when the world slept. They held those things at first, not tightly, but reverently, like they knew what they had. But then something shifted, not loudly, not all at once, just quietly, like how seasons change when you're not looking. You didn't notice it the first time they pulled away mid-conversation, eyes fogging over like they weren't really here. You excused it the first night they slept with their back turned, the warmth between you replaced by an unfamiliar cold. You called it stress. You told yourself everyone withdraws sometimes, but it kept happening. You saw how they flinched when you reached for their hand during arguments, how they shut down when you told them about the nightmares, how they laughed a little too quickly when you cried, not cruelly, just nervously, like emotions scared them more than monsters ever could. Still, you stayed. You stayed because your love had always been patient. You stayed because you had learned to fix people, to understand before you ever judged. You stayed because you thought maybe love could soften whatever they were running from. You believed in staying the way some people believe in prayer, desperately, faithfully, even when nothing changed. But love isn't always enough to make someone feel safe if they've never felt safe with themselves. One day, they stopped coming home early, stopped asking about your day, stopped looking at you like you were still their favorite thing in the world. You told yourself it was just a phase, that they'd come back to you once the fog cleared, but they didn't. They left quietly, the way cowards do, with no real explanation, just a bag packed, a short text, and a silence that screamed louder than any goodbye. You sat on the edge of the bed that still smelled like them, staring at a door that would never open again, and all you could think was, what did I do wrong? That's the cruelty of this kind of heartbreak. It makes you question the very parts of you that were always whole. You replayed every moment, every time you loved too much, every time you gave without asking for anything back. You wondered if maybe you overwhelmed them, if your softness felt like pressure, if your depth made them drown, if your willingness to stay made them feel trapped. But the truth was simpler and far sadder. They didn't leave because you were too much. They Left because you were real, and real love doesn't let people hide. Real love asks you to feel, to show up, to stay even when it's hard. Real love breaks down the walls we build around our traumas. Real love is terrifying when all you've ever known is pretending. And they, for all their promises and poetry, weren't ready. They loved how you made them feel, but they didn't know how to love you. They adored the mirror you held up to their potential, but they couldn't handle the reflection of their truth. You saw them fully, gently, without judgment, and that kind of clarity scared them more than rejection ever could. So they ran, not toward something better, just toward something easier. And you were left with the echoes, the texts that once said, "I'll never leave," the memories that now felt like lies, the ghost of a love that promised to stay and vanished anyway. You stopped eating dinner at the table. You started sleeping with the lights on. You avoided songs that used to be yours, but slowly, painfully, you began to understand. Their betrayal wasn't proof that you were unlovable. It was proof that they were unready. You were the right kind of love at the wrong time in their growth. You were the mirror they weren't brave enough to look into. You were the calm after a storm they hadn't finished raging through. You were whole, and they hadn't learned how to hold something whole without cracking it. That doesn't make you foolish for loving them. It makes you brave, because in a world where most people guard their hearts behind sarcasm, distractions, and detachment, you gave yours with honesty, and it wasn't wasted. Even if they couldn't keep it, your love remains proof that something beautiful once lived in a space that couldn't sustain it. And maybe that's the saddest part, not that they left, but that they'll never know what it's like to stay and be transformed by something true. But you do, and even now, especially now, that counts for something. They didn't leave with thunder, just silence. No slammed door, no confrontation. Just a presence erased and a quiet that wrapped itself around your chest like a question, with no answer. For days, the house felt like it belonged to someone else. The walls still remembered their voice, the couch still curved where they used to sit, and your body, your kind, tired body, still woke up expecting their weight. Beside you, you didn't cry right away. You just went still. You moved through the motions like someone waiting for time to undo what had already happened. You replayed everything, trying to find the moment, the exact moment, when it all shifted, when love stopped being enough, when your warmth became something they couldn't hold. But the truth revealed itself gently, not loudly. It wasn't your fault. You loved deeply, and they couldn't meet you there. They weren't cruel. They weren't monsters. They were just scared of being seen, of staying, of what it meant to be loved without masks. You loved them with presence. They needed distance. You offered safety. They only understood chaos. You brought stillness. They only felt alive in storms, and eventually, you stopped asking what was wrong with you. You started asking, what do I need now? The answers didn't come all at once, but one morning, you made coffee just for you. You opened the curtains and let the sun touch your skin again. You sat with the ache without rushing it away, like an old friend visiting one last time. You didn't want revenge. You didn't want to replace them. You just wanted you back. So you started reclaiming the spaces they left behind, not by pretending they never existed, but by planting something honest in the absence you wrote down. The things you stayed silent about. You forgave yourself for every time you made excuses for their distance. You looked in the mirror and said, I was never too much because you weren't. You were whole, willing, brave, and from now on, you promised yourself, I won't shrink to be held. I won't beg to be seen. You still believe in love, not the kind that performs, but the kind that shows up, and you'll love again, but next time you'll ask different questions. Do they listen when I'm quiet? Can they hold space for my softness without confusing it for weakness? Do they know how to stay when love becomes real, not just romantic? You won't guard your heart behind bitterness, but you'll guard it with wisdom. You'll recognize the difference between attention and intention, between affection and consistency, between desire and devotion. And slowly, beautifully, the grief will turn into gratitude, not for the pain, but for what it taught you, that you can survive the leaving, that your love is not a burden, that your heart, even after breaking, still beats with hope. You're not broken, you're becoming. If you've ever loved someone who wasn't ready for something real, you're not alone. Your love wasn't the problem. Their fear was. This is Broken Truth, where we unravel the reasons behind betrayal in love. Subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart that's been left behind.